There is a quiet difference between people who simply speak and those who are truly heard, and if you pay close attention, you'll notice it has very little to do with intelligence and everything to do with clarity, intention, and psychological awareness. Most people grow up believing that speaking smart means using big words, talking fast, or sounding overly formal, but in reality, that approach often creates distance rather than connection. Think about the last time someone explained something in a complicated way. You may have nodded, but internally you disconnected. Now think about someone who explained a complex idea in a simple, relatable way. You stayed engaged, you understood, and more importantly, you remembered. This is because the human brain is not designed to admire complexity, it is designed to seek clarity and conserve effort. When something feels easy to understand, it feels trustworthy, and when it feels trustworthy, it becomes influential. At the core of powerful communication lies a simple but often ignored truth. People do not first respond to your words, they respond to your energy. Before someone processes what you are saying logically, they are already making emotional judgments about you. They are subconsciously asking, is this person confident? Are they clear? Do I need to pay attention? This happens in milliseconds, which means that your tone, pace, and presence matter just as much, if not more, than your vocabulary. For example, imagine two people presenting the same idea in a meeting. One speaks with hesitation, frequently says, avoids eye contact, and keeps correcting themselves. The other speaks calmly, pauses intentionally, and delivers the same idea with clarity. Even if the first person's idea is technically better, the second person will be perceived as more credible. That is the psychology of communication at work. Confidence is not about being loud or dominant, it is about certainty in your delivery. And certainty does not come from pretending, it comes from clarity of thought. When your thinking is scattered, your speech becomes scattered. This is why the smartest communicators often take a moment before they speak. That small pause is not hesitation, it is preparation. It allows them to organize their thoughts so that when they do speak, their words feel structured and intentional. For instance, instead of jumping into a long explanation, a smart communicator might begin with, "There are 2 key points here," and then proceed to explain them one by one. This instantly reduces confusion and makes the listener feel guided rather than overwhelmed. Over time, this habit builds authority, because people start associating your voice with clarity. Another critical aspect of speaking smart is understanding the limitation of attention. People are constantly distracted, even when they appear to be listening. Their minds are processing other thoughts, reacting emotionally, and filtering information. This means that if your message is too long, too dense, or too unstructured, it will simply not land. Consider a scenario where a manager gives a 10-minute explanation filled with details, background, and side points. By the end, most of the team remembers only fragments. Now compare that to a manager who says, "Here's the goal, here's what we need to do, and here's the deadline." The second approach is not only clearer, it is far more effective. This is because smart communication respects cognitive load. It makes things easier to process, not harder. Silence is another powerful tool that most people ignore. Many individuals feel uncomfortable with pauses and try to fill every second with words, but in doing so, they weaken their message. Silence, when used intentionally, adds weight to what you say. A pause before an important point builds anticipation, and a pause after it allows the idea to settle. For example, instead of saying everything in one continuous flow, a speaker might say, "This decision will impact the entire project, and we need to get it right." That pause creates emphasis. It signals importance. Without it, the sentence would simply pass by unnoticed. Silence also gives you control over pacing, which subconsciously signals confidence and composure. Listening, too, plays a much bigger role in speaking smart than most people realize. The majority of people listen only to respond. They are already thinking about what they will say next while the other person is still talking. This leads to shallow conversations and missed signals. Smart communicators, on the other hand, listen to understand. They pay attention not just to words, but to tone, hesitation, and emotion. Imagine a colleague saying, "Yeah, the workload is fine," but their tone sounds tired. A surface-level listener will accept the statement. A deeper listener will recognize the mismatch and respond differently, perhaps by asking, "Are you sure? It sounds like it's been a bit heavy lately." This level of awareness creates trust, and trust amplifies influence. Emotion is another layer that cannot be ignored. People like to believe they make decisions logically, but in reality, emotion plays a dominant role. Logic justifies what emotion already decided. This is why storytelling is such a powerful communication tool. A well-told story does not feel like persuasion, it feels like experience. For instance, instead of telling a team, "We need to improve customer service," a leader might share a story about a frustrated customer who almost left but stayed because of one thoughtful interaction. That story creates a mental image, and that image creates emotional engagement. Suddenly, the message is not just heard, it is felt. Framing is another subtle but powerful technique. The way you present an idea can completely change how it is received. For example, saying, "This plan might fail," creates doubt and resistance, whereas saying, "This plan has challenges, but here's how we manage them," creates confidence and direction. The information is similar, but the framing changes the emotional response. Smart communicators are aware of this and choose their words carefully, not to manipulate, but to guide understanding. They understand that communication is not just about truth, it is about perception. Energy plays a critical role in how your message is received. Communication is not just about what you say, but how present you are when you say it. Low energy signals disinterest, while focused energy signals importance. This does not mean being overly dramatic or loud, it means being intentional. Imagine explaining an idea while distracted or multitasking. The message instantly loses its impact. Now imagine speaking with full attention, maintaining eye contact, and delivering each sentence with purpose. The same words carry significantly more weight. Presence transforms ordinary communication into memorable communication. Adaptability is another hallmark of effective speakers. There is no one-size-fits-all communication style. The way you speak to a friend is different from how you speak in a professional setting. The way you explain something to a beginner must differ from how you explain it to an expert. For example, a software developer explaining a system using technical jargon to a non-technical client will create confusion, while simplifying the explanation using analogies will create clarity. Smart communicators constantly adjust based on the listener's level of understanding, emotional state, and expectations. Word choice carries emotional weight. Small differences in language can shift the entire tone of a conversation. Saying, "This is a problem," can create anxiety, while saying, "This is a challenge we can solve," creates optimism. Saying, "You're wrong," can trigger defensiveness, while saying, "There might be another perspective here," invites discussion. These subtle adjustments do not change the message itself, but they dramatically change how the message is received. Questions are one of the most powerful tools in communication. Instead of always explaining or instructing, asking thoughtful questions engages the listener. It transforms the interaction from a one-sided delivery into a collaborative exchange. For example, instead of saying, "This is the best strategy," you might ask, "What approach do you think would work best here?" This invites participation and gives the other person a sense of ownership. When people feel involved, they are more likely to agree and support the outcome. Another advanced technique is structuring your message in layers. Start with a simple overview, then gradually add detail if needed. This prevents overwhelming the listener. For instance, instead of diving into every detail immediately, you might begin with, "Here's the main idea," and then ask if they want more detail. This approach respects the listener's attention and gives them control over the depth of the conversation. Fear is one of the biggest barriers to effective communication. Fear of judgment, fear of making mistakes, fear of not sounding intelligent enough. But hesitation is often more damaging than imperfection. A slightly imperfect message delivered with confidence is far more effective than a perfect message delivered with uncertainty. This is because people respond to conviction. Over time, the only way to reduce this fear is through exposure, speaking more, engaging more, and gradually becoming comfortable with being heard. Practice is not about memorizing scripts, it is about building awareness. Recording yourself, analyzing how you speak, identifying where you lose clarity, these small efforts compound over time. Feedback is equally important. Asking others, did that make sense? Or, how could I explain this better? Creates a loop of continuous improvement. Those who actively seek feedback improve faster than those who avoid it. Mirroring is another subtle but powerful psychological technique. It involves aligning your tone, pace, or communication style with the person you are speaking to. When done naturally, it creates a sense of familiarity and comfort. For example, if someone speaks slowly and thoughtfully, matching that pace can make them feel more understood. However, mirroring must be subtle. If it feels forced, it becomes noticeable and ineffective. Repetition, when used strategically, reinforces important ideas. This does not mean repeating the exact same sentence, but expressing the same concept in slightly different ways. For example, if you want to emphasize the importance of clarity, you might say it directly, then illustrate it with an example, and then summarize it again. This layered repetition increases retention and ensures that your message stays with the listener. At a deeper level, communication is about reducing friction. The easier you make it for someone to understand you, the more effective you become. This involves simplifying your language, structuring your thoughts, and eliminating unnecessary details. It also involves being aware of the listener's perspective, what they care about, what they already know, and what they need to understand. Ultimately, speaking smart is not about impressing others, it is about connecting with them. It is about making your ideas accessible, your message clear, and your presence impactful. When you shift your focus from "how do I sound" to "how well am I understood," everything changes. You stop overcomplicating. You stop performing. You start communicating with intention. The most powerful communicators are not those who speak the most, but those who make every word count. They understand when to speak, when to pause, and when to listen. They adapt to their audience, choose their words carefully, and deliver their message with clarity and confidence. Over time, this approach builds trust, influence, and authority. And perhaps the most important realization is this: communication is a skill, not a talent. It can be learned, practiced, and mastered. Every conversation is an opportunity to improve. Every interaction is a chance to refine your approach. The more aware you become, the more intentional your communication becomes. In a world where everyone is talking, clarity becomes rare. And rarity creates value. When you learn to speak with clarity, you stand out, not because you are louder but because you are understood. And when you are understood, you are remembered. Because in the end, powerful communication is not about saying more. It is about saying what matters, in a way that truly reaches people. And once you master that, your words stop being just words. They become influence, connection, and impact. As you go deeper into the psychology of communication, you begin to realize that most conversations are not just exchanges of information. They are negotiations of meaning, identity, and emotion. Every time you speak, you are not only sharing an idea, you are also shaping how others perceive you and how they feel in your presence. This is why two people can deliver the exact same sentence and receive completely different reactions. It is not the sentence itself, but the emotional context around it that determines its impact. For example, saying, "we need to talk," in a tense tone can immediately create anxiety, while saying the same words in a calm and supportive tone can feel constructive. The words are identical, but the psychological signal is entirely different. One powerful way to improve your communication is to become aware of emotional triggers, both yours and others. Certain words, tones, or situations can trigger defensiveness, frustration, or disengagement. Smart communicators learn to recognize these patterns and navigate around them. For instance, instead of saying, "you always make this mistake," which triggers defensiveness, you might say, "I've noticed this pattern, and I think we can improve it together." The second approach reduces resistance and opens the door for collaboration. This is not about being overly careful, it is about being strategically aware. Another advanced principle is the idea of mental framing windows. Every listener is interpreting your words through their own experiences, beliefs, and expectations. This means your message is never received exactly as you intended, it is filtered. To communicate effectively, you need to align your message with the listener's frame. For example, if you are speaking to someone who values efficiency, emphasize time-saving benefits. If you are speaking to someone who values quality, emphasize precision and excellence. The same idea can be presented in different ways depending on what matters to the listener. Clarity also comes from reducing unnecessary language. Many people dilute their message by adding filler phrases like, I think, maybe, or kind of. While these words may feel polite, overusing them weakens your delivery. Compare, I think we should probably consider changing this, with, we should change this. The second sentence is clearer and more decisive. This does not mean you should always sound absolute, but you should be intentional about when you soften your language and when you strengthen it. Another subtle but powerful habit is naming your intention. Before diving into a conversation, briefly state why you are speaking. For example, I want to quickly align on this, or I'd like to share an idea that might improve this process. This gives the listener context and prepares their mind to receive your message. Without this, people often feel lost or unsure about where the conversation is going. There is also a rhythm to effective communication. Just like music, good communication has variation. It is not monotone. It speeds up, slows down, emphasizes certain parts, and softens others. This variation keeps attention alive. If everything is delivered at the same pace and tone, even important points lose their impact. By consciously adjusting your rhythm, you guide the listener's attention and highlight what matters most. Storytelling can be taken even further by using specific details. Instead of saying, a customer was unhappy, you might say, a customer emailed us at 11 p.m., frustrated because their issue had been unresolved for 3 days. The added detail creates a clearer picture and makes the story more engaging. Specificity brings stories to life, and vivid stories are more memorable. Another powerful technique is contrast. When you present two opposing ideas side by side, it creates clarity. For example, we can continue with the current approach and face delays, or we can adjust now and stay on track. This makes the decision easier because the options are clearly defined. Contrast simplifies complexity and helps people see the consequences of different choices. As you become more skilled, you'll start to notice that communication is less about speaking and more about guiding attention. Every word, pause, and gesture either directs attention or distracts from it. Smart communicators are intentional about where they want the listener's focus to go. They eliminate distractions, emphasize key points, and create a clear path for understanding. Over time, this level of awareness transforms how you communicate. You stop reacting impulsively and start responding deliberately. You become more patient, more precise, and more effective. And perhaps most importantly, you begin to enjoy communication, not as a performance, but as a meaningful exchange that creates connection and impact. As your awareness deepens, you begin to notice patterns in how conversations unfold. You start to recognize when someone is disengaging, when they are confused, or when they are resisting your message. These signals are often subtle, a slight shift in posture, a delayed response, a change in tone. Most people ignore these signals and continue speaking the same way, but smart communicators adjust in real time. If someone looks confused, they simplify. If someone seems disengaged, they re-engage with a question. This ability to adapt mid-conversation is what separates average communicators from exceptional ones. Another important layer is managing assumptions. Many communication breakdowns happen because we assume the other person understands what we mean, or we assume we understand what they mean. These assumptions create gaps. To reduce this, smart communicators clarify. They say things like, just to make sure we're on the same page, or, let me rephrase that. This might seem simple, but it prevents misunderstandings that could otherwise escalate into bigger issues. There is also a psychological principle called priming, where the first few words you say influence how the rest of your message is received. For example, starting with, this might sound complicated, prepares the listener to expect difficulty, while starting with, "This is actually quite simple," prepares them for clarity. The content may be the same, but the expectation changes the experience. By being mindful of how you begin your sentences, you can shape the listener's mindset from the start. Tone matching is another advanced skill. It involves aligning your emotional tone with the situation. If someone is serious, responding playfully might feel dismissive. If someone is relaxed, being overly formal might feel distant. Matching tone creates harmony in the conversation. It shows that you are not just hearing words, you are understanding context. Another powerful concept is ownership of communication. Instead of blaming the listener for not understanding, take responsibility for clarity. If someone says, "I don't get it," instead of thinking they are not paying attention, consider how you can explain it differently. This mindset shift leads to better communication outcomes because it keeps the focus on improvement rather than frustration. You also begin to realize the importance of ending conversations well. The final moments of a conversation often leave the strongest impression. Summarizing key points, confirming next steps, or simply ending with clarity ensures that your message stays intact. For example, saying, "So we're aligned on these 3 points," reinforces understanding and prevents confusion later. At a higher level, communication becomes less about individual conversations and more about consistency over time. The way you communicate repeatedly shapes your reputation. If you are consistently clear, thoughtful, and reliable in your communication, people begin to trust not just your words, but your judgment. This trust becomes a powerful asset. It makes future communication easier and more effective. Eventually, speaking smart becomes less of a technique and more of a mindset. You begin to approach every conversation with awareness, intention, and curiosity. You focus not just on what you want to say, but on what needs to be understood. And in doing so, you transform communication from a basic skill into a powerful tool for influence, connection, and growth. As you continue refining your communication, you begin to notice something deeper. Most people are not actually arguing about facts, they are reacting to interpretations. Two people can hear the same sentence and walk away with completely different meanings, not because the sentence changed, but because their internal filters shaped it differently. This is where advanced communication becomes less about speaking clearly and more about aligning interpretations. Instead of assuming your message was received as intended, you gently confirm it. For example, you might say, "What are you taking away from this?" Or, "How does this sound to you?" These simple questions reveal gaps in understanding before they turn into problems. Another powerful layer is emotional regulation. Your ability to stay calm, composed, and grounded, especially in difficult conversations, directly affects how your message is received. When emotions rise, clarity drops. This is why reacting impulsively often leads to miscommunication. Smart communicators create a small gap between stimulus and response. Even a brief pause allows you to respond thoughtfully instead of reacting emotionally. For instance, if someone criticizes your work, an immediate defensive reply may escalate the situation. But a composed response like, "That's helpful, can you clarify which part needs improvement?" shifts the conversation toward resolution. There is also a subtle art in knowing what not to say. Not every thought needs to be expressed. Not every silence needs to be filled. Restraint is a form of intelligence. In many situations, saying less creates more impact. For example, in negotiations, the person who speaks less often has more control, because silence creates pressure for the other person to fill the gap. This does not mean being passive. It means being intentional about when your words add value and when they do not. Another important concept is consistency between verbal and nonverbal communication. If your words say one thing but your tone or body language suggests another, people will trust the nonverbal signal. For example, saying, "I'm happy to help," in a tired or irritated tone creates confusion. But when your tone, posture, and words align, your message becomes stronger and more believable. This alignment builds credibility over time. Clarity can also be improved by using structure in everyday speech. Instead of presenting ideas randomly, organize them into clear sequences. For example, first, we identify the issue. Second, we analyze the options. Third, we decide on the best approach. This structure not only makes your message easier to follow, but also positions you as someone who thinks systematically. People trust structured thinkers because their communication feels reliable. Another technique is anticipation. Skilled communicators often address potential questions or objections before they are raised. For example, if you know someone might worry about risks, you might say, "You might be wondering about the risks. Here's how we're managing them." This reduces uncertainty and builds confidence in your message. It shows that you have thought ahead and considered different perspectives. You also begin to understand the power of timing beyond just pauses. Timing includes choosing the right moment to start a conversation. Delivering important information when someone is distracted, stressed, or unavailable reduces its effectiveness. Smart communicators consider context. They choose moments when the listener is more receptive, which increases the chances of their message being understood and accepted. At this level, communication becomes less reactive and more strategic. You are not just responding to situations, you are shaping them. You think about how your words will be received, how they will influence the conversation, and what outcome they will create. This does not make communication artificial. It makes it intentional. As mastery develops, you begin to notice that powerful communication often feels effortless to the listener, even though it is highly intentional beneath the surface. The listener experiences clarity, flow, and ease, without realizing how much thought has gone into creating that experience. This is similar to watching a skilled performer. Everything appears natural, but it is the result of deep practice and awareness. One of the most advanced skills at this stage is managing conversational direction without dominating it. Instead of forcing your point, you gently guide the conversation toward it. This can be done through strategic questions, subtle framing, or gradual build-up. For example, instead of directly telling someone they need to change their approach, you might ask, "What outcome are we aiming for?" Followed by, "Do you think this method is getting us there?" This allows the other person to arrive at the conclusion themselves, which makes it more powerful and less resistant. Another layer is understanding conversational momentum. Every conversation has a flow, and disrupting that flow can reduce effectiveness. If someone is emotionally engaged, introducing heavy data may break that engagement. If someone is focused on logic, introducing unrelated stories may feel distracting. Smart communicators match the momentum of the conversation and then gradually steer it in the desired direction. Language precision becomes increasingly important. As you refine your communication, you become more deliberate with your words. Instead of vague statements, you use precise language that reduces ambiguity. For example, instead of saying, "soon," you say, "by tomorrow afternoon." Instead of saying, "a lot," you say, "3 key areas." Precision builds clarity, and clarity builds trust. You also begin to recognize the role of identity in communication. People are more receptive to ideas that align with how they see themselves. For instance, if someone identifies as a problem solver, framing your message as a challenge they can solve makes it more appealing. This is not manipulation. It is alignment. It respects the listener's perspective and integrates your message into it. Another advanced concept is layered messaging. This means delivering a message that works on multiple levels: logical, emotional, and practical. For example, when proposing an idea, you might explain how it works: logic, why it matters, emotion, and what steps to take, practical. This multi-layered approach ensures that your message resonates with different types of thinkers. At this point, communication becomes a form of leadership. Even in everyday interactions, your ability to guide conversations, create clarity, and build understanding positions you as someone others naturally follow. Leadership is not about authority. It is about influence, and influence is built through communication. Over time, all these elements, clarity, listening, structure, emotion, timing, and awareness, begin to integrate into a single skill set. You no longer think about each technique separately. They become part of how you naturally communicate. And when that happens, speaking smart is no longer something you try to do. it becomes something you simply are. In the end, the goal is not perfection. It is progress. Each conversation is an opportunity to refine your approach, to understand people better, and to express your ideas more clearly. And as you continue this journey, you will notice that your words begin to carry more weight, not because they are louder or more complex, but because they are clear, intentional, and deeply understood. At the highest level of communication, something subtle but powerful begins to happen. You stop trying to control conversations, and instead you learn to shape them with awareness. You realize that every interaction is not just about exchanging words, but about managing attention, emotion, and meaning simultaneously. This is where communication becomes less mechanical and more intuitive. You begin to sense when to push forward and when to step back, when to explain and when to let the other person arrive at the understanding on their own. This balance creates conversations that feel natural, yet are highly effective. One of the most important shifts at this stage is moving from reacting to observing. Instead of immediately responding to what is said, you take a moment to observe how it is said, why it is said, and what it might actually mean beneath the surface. For example, if someone responds abruptly or seems dismissive, a reactive communicator might take it personally and respond defensively. But an observant communicator considers the possibility that the other person might be stressed, distracted, or dealing with something unrelated. This creates space for a more thoughtful response, such as, "Is everything okay?" Or, "It seems like something else might be on your mind." This level of awareness transforms potentially negative interactions into constructive ones. Another advanced skill is creating psychological safety through your communication. People speak more openly and honestly when they feel safe from judgment or dismissal. This does not require elaborate techniques. It often comes down to simple signals like acknowledging perspectives, validating emotions, and responding without interruption. For instance, saying, "That makes sense," or "I see where you're coming from," does not mean you fully agree, but it shows respect for the other person's viewpoint. This encourages deeper and more honest conversations, which ultimately leads to better outcomes. Clarity at this level also involves removing ambiguity not just from your words, but from your intentions. Many misunderstandings occur because people are unsure about what you actually want from the conversation. Are you informing, asking, suggesting, or deciding? When your intention is clear, your communication becomes more effective. For example, saying, "I'd like your input on this," sets a different expectation than saying, "Here's what we're going to do." This clarity prevents confusion and aligns the conversation from the beginning. Another powerful concept is emotional pacing. Just as you manage the logical flow of a conversation, you also manage its emotional flow. If a conversation becomes tense, you slow it down, soften your tone, and create space. If it becomes too passive or unfocused, you bring energy and direction. This ability to regulate emotional pacing allows you to maintain balance and keep the conversation productive, even in challenging situations. At this stage, you also become more comfortable with uncertainty. You no longer feel the need to have all the answers before speaking. Instead, you are willing to explore ideas openly, say, "I'm not sure, but let's figure it out," and invite collaboration. This openness does not reduce your credibility, it often enhances it, because it shows honesty and confidence without ego. You also begin to recognize that influence is not about forcing agreement, but about creating understanding. When people feel understood, they are naturally more open to your perspective. This is why listening remains central, even at the highest level of communication. The better you understand others, the more effectively you can communicate with them. Another subtle but impactful habit is closing the loop in conversations. Instead of leaving discussions open-ended, you bring them to a clear conclusion. This might involve summarizing key points, confirming decisions, or outlining next steps. For example, saying, "So we've agreed on these 2 actions, and we'll follow up next week," ensures that everyone leaves with the same understanding. This reduces confusion and builds reliability. Over time, your communication begins to reflect not just skill, but character. People start to associate you with clarity, calmness, and thoughtful expression. They listen more carefully when you speak, not because you demand attention, but because your words consistently provide value. This reputation compounds over time, making each future interaction easier and more impactful. And perhaps the most important realization at this level is that communication is not something you turn on and off. It is something you live. The way you speak reflects the way you think, and the way you think shapes the way you experience the world. As your communication improves, so does your ability to navigate relationships, resolve conflicts, and express ideas with confidence and clarity. In the end, speaking smart is not about mastering techniques. It is about mastering awareness. Awareness of yourself, awareness of others, and awareness of the moment you are in. When these come together, communication becomes more than just a skill. It becomes a form of influence that is subtle, respectful, and deeply effective. And once you reach this level, you no longer need to try to sound smart. Your clarity, presence, and intention make it evident in every word you speak.